Cory, Carla, welcome aboard to the show. So happy to have you today.
Happy
Happy
to
to
be
be
here.
here.
So I want to jump to a topic that I am going to confess is very close to my heart. My youngest son, I have a 13-year-old boy, an 11-year-old daughter, and a just turned 6-year-old raptor. Now,
Oh,
the reason I call him a raptor is because he is God's punishment to me for what I did to my parents, being hyperactive, ADHD,
oh,
just the full spectrum of madness. And my personal confession is when I was 5 years old, I came back with my report card. It was all F's. I tore it up. I was so ashamed. I was crying. My mother had to piece it together with sellotape, kind of like a forensics issue, to try to figure out what was happening. My first question to you is, describe to me from a parent's perspective, what's going through the parents' heads? What are the pains or the issues or the frustrations parents are feeling?
I'll take this because I'm a parent, and I have one child, and just to kind of talk a little bit about her, she's now at UCLA, and it took a lot. It took a team to actually get her to that that route, that pathway, right? And the major thing that we noticed, so both my husband and I are very well educated, and we're both engineers. He's a software and I'm a hardware engineer, and we didn't do too badly at school either, you know. So we thought we did something wrong, or we did something bad in our past lives. So what we did was we immediately got her into an extracurricular because she was super shy. She wasn't hyper like your son. She was able to find, finally, after 7 sports, Taekwondo was the one that got her to, for some reason, it really connected with her. So I'm a tennis player, and I play golf and tennis. I ski, I snowboard. Those are the things, and she doesn't like any of them. And so one thing that I did notice is that we have them find kind of like the passion that they need, because at some point we're gonna feel very there's a Korean saying, but I can't seem to get it in an English word. But there is this taptape. There's always like this feeling of like, what do I need to do? Who do I need to have a talk with or something? But it took about a good 7 years when we finally noticed that she was in the right path by the time she turned 11, that this is working, because she's like socializing. She's able to kind of assimilate herself. So it takes time.
So you were, I would argue, ahead of the curve, because when I look at me growing up, because my parents didn't have your knowledge. Back in the day, there was no names for these things, no awareness. For me, it wasn't until I want to say 22, 23,
Mm-hmm.
after the military, where I started figuring things out. It was only in university.
Mm.
So first of all, I would say, you're in a much better situation than what we were. So I think that's a silver lining right there. What is the problem? Like, what was the pain that you experienced? Like, this is actually what's happening. This doesn't make any sense. As two parents, we have to get together and figure this out. Like, why did you even send her to Taekwondo or 7 other sports?
Well, there's a lot of noise. For one thing, when we grew up, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was not a lot of streaming, and all we had is Atari, Nintendo, right? And so there's not. So I worked for Xbox during my junior year in junior engineer, and so you see that there's a whole cluster of an industry geared to getting their attention, right? So for us, it was a little harder as opposed to our parents. Our parents just gave us like a stick and a wheel. Go play, right? And then, or we're latchkey kids.
Yes.
We can't do that anymore because of the fact that there's a lot of noise. And in order to do that, there's got to be a way for us to kind of have them in a pathway or a solution where we feel kind of uh, assuaged that they're doing something useful, but we don't know if it's useful until like years later.
Right.
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 So your son's gonna somehow get there. I can help.
when we're at home, we see the symptoms at home. Would you agree procrastination is one of them, many others? Then we get to school. What are the symptoms that the school experiences? And I'll tell you again, personal confession, my son was kicked out of 2 schools. And the third one, we had to fight hard for him not to be kicked out. And this was his ages 4 and 5 and 3. So what is the school experience, basically? What are the difficulties?
School experience. I mean, you're talking about so was it a private school or a public school?
No, it was it was pre-K, so it was technically still private, right?
Yeah. So most of the time, the schools are actually very helpful. They will work with you until to a point where they're going to ask you for some help. I don't know what that is, because I'd never actually had that experience, but we were lucky enough to work with our principal and our headmaster for the school to help Sydney get out of that shyness. My daughter's name is Sydney. And that shyness, we were just really lucky to have Miss Quinn and Miss Jessica to get us through some of these things. And we didn't have any judgment in what she was saying and where she is actually experiencing, right? But at some point there's this thing called do you play tennis or do you play any kind of like golfer? There's the follow through, right?
Yep.
So I've coined the thing called follow through. When you're teaching something at school, it needs to be followed through at home.
Right.
It's constant 24 hours surveillance.
But this is part of the problem, right? So procrastination is a big issue. The distractions is a big issue. But the schools actually don't. And again, you've got very lucky, and sometimes you get great teachers, and that's wonderful.
Right.
But what we see, and keep me honest here if you agree, we see there's no accountability from the school to the home. So the abilities for the teachers always to be in that loop and to enforce that accountability, to get timely feedback doesn't always exist. So we see a disconnect there. And then there's this very it's okay, like it is what it is. They have this kind of permissive, approach of that's what they're capable of. So I let them be at that level. It's not a pushy, you can do more, you can be more. So I'm seeing these issues with the schools, and I'm like, well, my son, daughter, children, they're just sinking to this level of mediocrity because of these issues. Is this something that you would agree with? Do you see that as an issue in some cases in some schools, or am I completely out of whack here?
Oh, no, I agree.
You mind if I jump in, Carla?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't have any children, but I was diagnosed with ADD when I was 12. And it seems like there was a lot more hands-on approach with the teachers, and there wasn't this kind of permissive, non-disciplinary kind of action that happens within the school system. Now, like I said, I don't have any kids, so I don't know what it's been like for the last, 15, 20 years or so. But I do know that when I was growing up, and I was probably a lot like your raptor son in the sense of I didn't have a lot of the hyperactivity, but I definitely had the lack of task initiation, the procrastination, the comorbidities, of OCD, and some anxiety, right? I think a lot of it today is it's I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like overdiagnosed, but it's overemphasized.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the school who a lot of kids, right? And this trickles down from adults, right? Like I always say that being an adult is a choice, right? Like you could be a child the rest of your life.
I'm going to quote you on that.
being an adult, I believe, is a choice, right? Like because you kind of enter the adult world and you have to behave in a certain way, right? But having having the support when I was growing up, I felt it was so much more hands-on. And I don't think that the teachers were acting so much as therapists as they were educators. I think there's a lot more of this where we're trying to cross over into, we can diagnose your child, right? Like, we don't have the credentials to do it, but we think that your kid has ADD, or we think that your kid has ADHD, so you might want to go get them checked, right? So I think there's a lot more of that that's going on. Is it good or bad? I don't really know. I mean, I think it probably affects the kids more than it affects anybody else.
I want to dive into that because I think that's a very controversial point. Parents have issue with this. Like, they don't want, and again, there's a variety, there's all kinds, but there's the stream of parents that don't want their child labeled. I don't want my child labeled. Don't want him or her to get special treatment. I want them to be held to the level of accountability that anybody else is held to. I don't want this label to give them like, oh, you have XYZ. It's okay. Don't worry about it. So this is controversial. In fact, parents are saying they don't want their kids diagnosed. Treat them like everybody else. If there's an issue, I want you to talk to me right away.
Yeah, in the world of the noise that Carla speaks about, there are these kind of these there are these unfortunate trends that happen where a diagnosis is, or a diagnosis is something to be proud of.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, oh, I am this, or oh, I am that. In a world where there's more labels for everything, being able to label oneself is more of like, it's a calming mechanism for people, right? Like, oh, this is why I can't initiate tasks, or this is why I'm procrastinating, or this is why I don't have emotional regulation because I'm ADHD, or because I'm ADD. And having that label, having that diagnosis can be helpful, right? But I think that when things are being diagnosed by educators and not specific clinicians, or people who are people who have the credentials to do so. I mean, it takes time to actually get a diagnosis, right? Like of a neurodivergent disorder, right? It takes a lot of time. Like, you can't just necessarily look at the behavior of a child, because children are they do things that they're not developed yet. Their brains aren't fully developed, so they're going to do things that are extremely emotional. So it takes time to actually give a diagnosis.
Let's explore this paradigm, or this conflict. On the one hand, a diagnosis is useful because it gives you a set of tools to practice, to improve upon, which every parent can learn and can utilize at home, with or without a support mechanism. Obviously, we're going to argue, the three of us, that a support mechanism is helpful. It's what you do for a living. However, the flip side of that, and I'm going to open this for debate in a second, is that it creates almost a culture of victimism. Like, I'm a victim of my disease. I have a label. I can't do what other people can do. While in fact, I would argue that maybe you can do more. So
yes,
this creates I think, a problem that can go good, it can go bad. How do you deal with that issue?
I think there's kind of two sides, and then I'll kick it over to Carla, because I know she's got some really good meat on this. But there's a doom loop of victimization, and there's kind of a flywheel of a superhero, right? Or like having superpowers. And the victimization can get exacerbated by the noise that Carla spoke about. So if you're constantly being fed things that you're this because of that, then you kind of stay in what, and this is more of like a Jim Collins term, like a doom loop versus a flywheel, right? So you kind of like stay in that doom loop. But if you can get yourself in, I mean, storytelling, right? Like, we think about the story arc, right? Like, you don't want to be the villain, you want to be the hero. You have to first be the guide, and then you can be the hero, right? Or you find a guide, to get you to that solution, to get you to the resolution.
Is this something we control, or is it out of our hands, or maybe there's a third answer? I see people reporting that their bosses are basically treating them differently. after, in fact, there's a discrimination case going on right now with a close friend of mine. The boss kind of treats them as if they have a disease. Once she heard about the diagnosis, which was completely unintended, somebody outed her by mistake. And then it basically hurt her status at work, even though I would argue that her narrative, and obviously my narrative, because I know the person, is that it does give her the superhero powers. So how do we deal with that? And Carla, I'll tag you into this now.
Actually, I'm trying to take notes here. What you guys are saying. There was a few things that you guys were talking about there that Cory kind of hit the nail on the head. Was that there are a lot more people who are getting diagnosed somehow. It's either a mild one, and then they slowly go into it as IEP. So they start with anxiety, and then they start with OCD, they start with ADHD, ADD, and then to a point where, okay, where is this? And then the parent starts crying. Because just last week, I actually went through this with one parent, and his kid is actually getting, is getting reprimanded. I mean, not in a bad way, but it's a bad way for a parent. So
right.
When signals are getting sent from an administrator to the parent, all of a sudden we feel like we did something wrong. But if the administrator is saying something to the kid, all of a sudden the kid feels inadequate or no confidence.
That's key.
Right? So based on labels, the parents, so it comes back to the parents. The parents want to find that label so that they don't feel bad about it. Right? And then once they get a diagnosis or a label, they're like, oh, that's it. That's what it's always been.
Right.
But you can't always put it back on the parent because one, we're not trained. So that's the other disconnect, is that administrators and teachers are also not trained for this stuff. Right? They can't really diagnose it. Their job is to teach 15 to 40 kids, depending on where you are, public or private. 15 to 40 kids. Then comes the shame. So it's like there's like a phase. So the shame portion of it is when the parents finally break down because now the kid feels bad.
Right.
And then the teacher also feels bad. There's like feeling bad everywhere. So at that point, that's when we kind of come into the picture where we're kind of like this therapy. And it's really hard because for me, I want the kids to do well. So Cory and I, we came from a startup world where we're building hardware, we're building software. So that one is just a job. This is more kind of where it hits all these empathy, sympathy, all these emotional stuff that I actually feel because I feel it from a parent, and Cory feels it from the fact that he felt inept when he was growing up, feeling all these things, right? And there is no solution right now. The only solution I can think of is really having the teachers, which also costs money.
Yeah.
Right? It also costs money to train them. So if we could train engineers for onboarding, so I'm going to go back to my days as an engineer. If I could be trained to be onboarded, if I could be trained to go for a certification, if I can be trained to actually start looking for, do I become a manager or do I become a technical leader? Why can't we do that to teachers? Right? But that's a lot of money. And education right now is not at all equipped or have the budget to do that. And it's an ongoing thing where is it a chicken and egg? Where does this start and who can we blame? And that's where you go down the victimization. What you're saying is that there's that victimization aspect of it where you're kind of thinking, well, I gotta blame somebody.
Yeah.
Right? I can't blame the teacher. I can't blame myself because then I'll be admitting to something. But there's no one to blame. Each child is individually unique. And that's where sometimes I come in where I'm talking to a child. But you know what the problem is that's why I don't tutor anymore. Is they look at me as their parent.
Yeah.
And so I find these academic coaches who can be speaking for them with them or to them at maybe 7-8 years older. So they can be a mentor. We need to find mentors for these kids. We need to find somebody who's relatable, right? And
this is such a critical point. I just want to stop on it for a second.
Oh, sorry.
So the age gap is incredibly important. I'll give an example. Scouts or Rotary Youth Leadership or many other programs, what they do is the children that go through the program, a few years later, they become the counselors. And what that creates is this peer interaction where you're looking up to the person, but not as a parent, but as a slightly older brother or sister. This is so important. I was a counselor for RILA, for the Rotary program for many years. I did Scouts. I did a lot of other things. I want to stop on this point for a second. Why does that, like, what's the problem with the parent relationship versus the older brother relationship? Why does that change the dynamic?
Older brother or the parent, you mean?
Yeah, so as you were saying, where you have the counselors that have a small gap of age versus why you stopped. Why is there a difference? Why is that important from a strategic perspective?
Well, if actually Cory and I talk about this a lot, where if you think about it, when we were kids, I can't think of a time I actually listened to my parents. I can't think of a time I listened to my parents. But you know what? It's stuck in somewhere. I'm not very good with anatomy. I don't know, the frontal lobe. Maybe it sits there for a while, and then by the time you finish college, all of a sudden it blooms. You're like, oh my God, that's what my parents were talking about. You know?
Well, we are products of our parents, right? So it eventually comes out, right? Like,
right.
Depending on your family structure, of course, but
and depending on exactly what that trigger was, right? So if you want to think about it that way, where I was able to actually, so when I first tutored my child, that was the whole point, was me tutoring my child. I didn't think of tutoring anyone else. And she was traveling for Team USA. So she is an actual Olympic level athlete.
Oh, wow.
Right? And she just happened to have this thing, this really good talent. But I was still traveling for work as well. So luckily, a lot of startups, we do a lot of things from work from home. We carry our laptops and we can go anywhere. So Cory and I were working on that. So I was in Taiwan when I first tutored my child, and then she did well in school. So this was Zoom beta. This was like very at the beginning. But the problem is that it's just not her. There's a lot more. And then parents who are in private school, complain, well, why am I paying this much money for a private school and my kid? But dude, sorry, I don't mean to call you dude.
It's totally okay. We curse on this show regularly. We haven't got into that today, so we're doing well.
So what it is that we are so much more experienced than the kids. Yeah. We feel like we know the answer.
Yeah.
And that's where the disconnect is if you have a mentor or a tutor or a teacher that's just a little older, you look at your 11 and 13-year-olds. If they had a teacher that's like not Miss Ratchet, all of a sudden they love school. There's this like connectivity where they don't look older. They don't look older than them. They feel like they can speak their language.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with habituation too. You know, like you kind of just stop listening to your parents because they say the same things over and over. Yeah. But then you find out when you move away, if you do, that a lot of the things that they say are totally right. You know, and so, but that's kind of that recall, right? That's the phenomenon of the brain. How we can recall these things that are just deep within our psyche, right? And then we actually like use them in the real world, to get us through. But we do, Carla, what was that saying that you said, like promotion, because we kind of have like a similar mechanism where we like promote, where we promote our, what was that saying that you said?
So one of the things that I take pride with, Ari, is that the kids who I tutored in the past are now academic coaches. So that's the follow through I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then that's called promotion to motion. So with that idea, think about what we studied in school. How do you apply it? So I doubled in college, and I was stupid. I'm gonna admit it here. I was stupid because I was an electrical engineer, but then I doubled in physics. I don't know why. It was the dumbest thing I ever did because my
Well, it
GPA
helps
went
our
down because of
business, so
physics.
thank you.
Yeah. So I did physics, and you know why I did physics? It's not because someone forced me. It's because of the fact that I want to find out why transistors work the way they work. So these are chipsets, and I'm thinking, well, okay, I can use a chip. I can put it there, and it works. It's a relay. What's in it? So then I applied, and then I went to physics, and that's when I found, oh, it's electrons. It's like the movement of them. They don't. Kids these days don't have that curiosity because it's fed to them. So they're not yearning for that, that want.
Yeah,
How do we do that?
That's a good point. There is a deficit of intrinsic learning, and
Mhm.
it's something that I hold deep in my. I'm an ABL. I always be learning. That's what I say. If I'm not learning, I don't feel like I'm alive. So there's too much extrinsic motivation that's happening right now, and not enough intrinsic.
Is this tied to? So I'm going to simplify this. Keep me honest if you agree with me. I'm going to call this the lack or demise of curiosity that happens as children age. And that lack of curiosity, I would say, is the root cause. Now, if you don't completely disagree with me, my question is this: whose fault is it? Is it the school system? Is it the media and the phones and the distractions? Is it the parents, or do we all have a part to play?
Yeah, I mean, like Carla said, it's you cannot pinpoint it to one thing, right? The world that we live in is too complex.
Yeah.
It's so much more complex. It's always been complex. We just haven't known how complex. We haven't had that complexity at our fingertips, right? Like there's a lot of breadth and not much depth in knowledge these days. So is it lack of curiosity? Partly. Is it social media to blame? Partly. Is it mainstream media to blame? Partly. Is it, everything else? Is it the school system? Is it the social educational learning? Is it the different types of learning systems that are happening in different states? Totally. I mean, it's just a combination. It's a mixture of so many different things. It's easy to point the finger at social media because we have this in our hand all the time. So it's easy to blame something like that. But humans, well, maybe not so much, in the future with artificial intelligence, but the internet is a direct reflection of humanity, right? So we can only blame humans. We can't necessarily blame the devices. We can't necessarily blame, Facebook or Twitter or any of these big conglomerates.
Here's my point. I had the same situation, right? This was 80s, 90s. There was no Facebook. There was no Twitter.
Mm-hmm. There was magazines.
Skype hadn't come along, yet I had all these problems, right? So I had all these problems, right? But social media, all this didn't exist. So what that leads me to believe is the school system really hasn't changed over the last 40 years.
Yeah,
parents and kids have not kind of changed over the last 40 years. So it leads me to believe that this is the trio. And as a parent, I've taken action because I lived through this. So I have some opinions about what's the way to go. My question to you, Carla, is what were your, let's say, educational decisions that you made with your child in order to be like, okay, we're going to get over this. And I can blame the whole world, but at the end of the day, there's only one person who's in control. It's me and my kids.
Right. No, I actually, dude, you hit that on the nail again, is the fact that I took it upon myself. Even though, and this is the one thing that kills me with sometimes when we do have parents who ask me about how can I help the kids, right? And then at the end of the conversation, you know what they say? oh, let me talk to my kids to see what they want to do.
Mm.
And so for me, it's almost like, why? I mean, they're kids. Why
That's
would they have
permissive parenting. That's permissive.
Oh yeah,
parenting.
that's permissive parenting. It's almost like, well, dude, the kid's like 9 years old.
Right. They're going to be able to make a valued decision.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you know what DINK is? So DINK is a double income with no kids.
Mm.
So before you have kids, you're a DINK. You get married, you're a DINK. You're like double income. And you're still thinking that you want to have that old life. And so you want to figure out how to normalize having a kid and still have that life. But it doesn't work that way, because a little of you is no longer focused on this, and this. Now there's a that. Right?
Yeah, you kind of sorry, Carla, this is a really good point. You kind of drop and live vicariously through your child, right? And then you kind of stay in your child's, you live your life through your child's eyes. That happens a lot. I mean, I don't know, but I see that in my friends a lot, because I always say that there's, like people with children always say to myself, they say, well, you don't know what it's like because you don't have kids. Well, then I just say, well, I know what it's like to not have kids. So there are things that I know that you don't know, right? So like we see like different perspectives, but like living that vicariously through a child, like I think that's, I think that happens more often than not.
Right. I mean, to kind of add on to that is that, I'm going to go back because my brain is built in schematics and engineering. So I was just talking to Cory about this the other day, because it was just driving me crazy.
Well, I think Ari's an engineer too, right?
Oh, you're an engineer?
Yeah, he's an engineer too.
Don't out me.
Oh, I didn't know. Are you a double E? Analog or digital?
So we're outing me here. I developed military grade hardware and software when I was 18. I sold my first company when I was 15. I was created my first business when I was 8, which was fixing and building computers. Multiple exits, serial entrepreneur, finance, University of Chicago, an MBA. I did a few things. So
it's awesome.
I helped Apple, Qualcomm, and Intel design their next generation chips, Snapdragon and such, through DFM predictive analytics. So yeah, I've done a thing or two.
Oh, then we probably cross paths at Apple, because I worked at Apple.
Really? Did you know? Did you work with Bob Traynor?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know Bob?
I do.
Oh my God.
Bob loves me.
Okay, tell Bob. Well, actually, I can just tell him.
Tell him you talked to Ari Block.
Yeah,
tell him that he will remember me like right away. But we'll talk offline about that.
So, do you know Dave Reha too?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. Dave and Bob were the ones who hired me as a junior engineer when I was working at Space Systems, because I built solar panels for Space Station and. But anyway, this is great.
We're all engineers.
We're talking about
signals.
Yeah. When parents have kids, how they want to keep their independent lives.
So what do you do? Like, you're a parent, you have this child. What do you do? What's the difference, right? So, forget the whole world. I'm going to do this to help my child.
Right. So I had to. So a friend of mine who's a child psychologist was talking to me about. We were having Sydney was still 2 years old, and I was having this argument with Sydney. It's 2-year-old, and then she kind of sat me back and said, "Do you know that she's 2?" And I said, "I know, but I can't believe this." And then I was like, "Why can't she understand?" And then
fight only honorable battles, right?
So there's a signal disconnect.
Yeah,
and I needed to be back down so that I could connect with my kid. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've learned in signal design, in board design, is that you have to have all these test points so you still see that there's a connection. And the only way you can connect is that somehow you have to remember how you were when you were a dink.
Yeah.
Right? And that doesn't fit the profile for now you have a kid. Right. So that's why the coaches that I hire are close enough that my kid's going to look at, or the kids that we have are going to look at them as mentors.
So
it's really important to have mentorship.
There's deep research into this, by the way. This is called expert bias. If you kind of go down the path of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and talk about psychological biases, then this is it, right? When you are become the expert, the parent, you're 20 years removed, you just can't get back to that space of empathy of how does it feel to be the child. This is well researched. So this is not a theory or a hypothesis. It's a real thing that affects every one of us. And in fact, it goes also to schools. When you're working with your professor, it's really difficult for most of them to even explain it in a way that a student that's never seen this before will actually understand, because they have that expert bias. So this is incredibly important points, and also very well researched and backed up. Believe it or not, we are way over time. This is the problem. This is the problem with topics that I'm passionate about. I just can't stop. So we have one last question. It's the only question that's scripted in the show. Our audience knows that, you guys have no questions for me, and I don't even know what I'm going to ask before we get into this. But there is one question.
Okay.
Carla, if you were to go back to 20-something-year-old Carla, and this is a difficult question because it's personal, what would you tell her?
Enjoy your life. Enjoy while it's young, because there's a lot of years ahead of you to be an adult. Just enjoy it. Soak it in. And I tell her this to this day. And she's at UCLA first year. And when she told me that she was studying, because she was trying to keep up with the other valedictorians in her school, because everybody's valedictorian there. And she said, "Oh, it's so hard." And I said, "Yeah, but you also have to go out. Just enjoy yourself." That's it.
Cory?
I would probably say take life a little bit more seriously, because
you're a party dude. That's what happened.
Well, you can kind of tell, because I think it's a lot harder to make up time as you get older than it is when you're younger and a little bit more,
true.
Agile and flexible and somewhat malleable. You become just so much more rigid as you get older. But it has its advantages. But I would definitely say, I would probably say take life a little bit more seriously.
We have different ones.
It's interesting. We got the spectrum, right? We got the spectrum, the full spectrum right there in those answers. I got to tell you that it's very individual. And for me, I was on Carla's side of the spectrum. And it actually took me getting to my MBA at University of Chicago to be like, wait, hold on. The value here is actually to build a network, to make relationships, and I actually need to spend time with these people and make connections and not work so hard and take everything so seriously. So I think everybody maybe comes from a different side of the spectrum, and we kind of try to meet in the middle. Carla, Cory, what an absolute delight. This has been so much fun. And
yes, it is.
All I can do is advise parents who are dealing with their own set of issues, and we all are, is, go talk to people who are in the business who can guide you, because support systems are important. And experience and knowledge matters. Thank you so much to both of you. I appreciate you both.
Thank you for having us.